The Pilgrim's Progress, From This World to That Which Is to Come, by John Bunyan. This edition is copyright 1890 by the American Tract Society, and begins with a memoir of the author, condensed from his Grace Abounding and the Life of Bunyan, by Canon Edmonds Venerables. The Life of Bunyan, Chapter 1. John Bunyan, the author of the book which has probably passed through more editions, had a greater number of readers, and been translated into more languages than any other book first written in the English tongue, was born in the parish of Elstow, in Bedfordshire, in the latter part of the year 1628. His father, Thomas Bunyan, though styling himself in his will by the more dignified title of brazier, was more properly what is known as a tinker, a mender of pots and kettles. He was not, however, a mere tramp or vagrant, as travelling tinkers were, and usually are still, but a man with a recognized calling, having a settled home and an acknowledged position in the village community of Elstow. The family of Bunyan, Bunyan, Boynon, Binyan, the name is found spelled in no fewer than 34 different ways, had been established in Bedfordshire from very early times. It was of long standing in Elstow, having once been in possession of a property considerable enough to have given the name of its possessor to the whole locality. A mile to the east of the village, near the hamlet of Harrowden, was a place long called Bunyan's End, and 2 fields there are still known by the name of Bunyan's and Further Bunyan's. It was in his own cottage on this land that Bunyan's grandfather, Thomas Bunyan, carried on the occupation of a petty chapman, or small retail dealer, and in this cottage, probably, John Bunyan was born. The mother of the immortal dreamer was one Margaret Bentley, who, like her husband, was a native of Elstow, and only a few months his junior. She did not come of the very squalid poor, but a people who, though humble in station, were yet decent and worthy in their ways. She was the second of Thomas Bunyan's 3 wives, dying after 17 years of marriage. Elstow, which as the birthplace of the author of the Pilgrim's Progress has gained a world-wide celebrity, is a quiet little village, which, though not much more than a mile from the populous and busy town of Bedford, yet lying aside from the main stream of modern life, preserves its old-world look to an unusual degree. Few villages are so little changed as Elstow. The old half-timbered cottages with overhanging stories, peaked dormers, and gabled porches, tapestried with roses and honeysuckles, must be much what they were in Bunyan's days. A village street with detached cottages, standing in gardens gay with the homely flowers John Bunyan knew and loved, leads to the village green, fringed with the churchyard elms, the scene of village festivities, statute hirings, and all the public occasions of village life. It is probably little altered from the time when our hero was the ringleader of the youth of the place in the dances in the greensward, which he tells us he found it so hard to give up, and in tipcat and other games innocent in theory, but which his conscience afterwards regarded as ungodly practices, even as the very ploughing of the wicked is sin. In the middle of the green is still seen the pedestal or stump of the market cross. At the upper end is the old Moot Hall of the 15th century, in front of which on the common Bunyan afterwards preached, and on the south side is the church, a fragment of the old Benedictine nunnery founded in 1078 by Judith, niece of William the Conqueror. This church, with its detached bell tower, was the scene of many of the fierce conflicts so vividly depicted by Bunyan in his Grace Abounding. The pulpit, if it survived the recent restoration, is the same from which Christopher Hall, the then parson of Elstow, preached the sermon which awoke his sleeping conscience. An old oaken bench is traditionally shown as the seat he used to occupy when he went to church twice a day, and that, too, with the foremost, counting all things holy that were therein contained. The 5 bells which hang in the belfry are the same in which Bunyan so delighted, the 4th bell, tradition says, being that he used to ring. The rough, ragged floor, all worn and broken with the hob-nailed boots of generations of ringers, remains undisturbed. One cannot see the door, set in its masonry, without recalling the figure of Bunyan standing in it after conscience, beginning to tender, told him that such practice was but vain, but yet unable to deny himself the pleasure of seeing others ring, hoping that, if a bell should fall, he could slip out safely behind rescue, ivy-clad remains of a once stately mansion, which may have given Bunyan the first idea of the very stately palace, the name of which was Beautiful. The cottage in which Bunyan was born has been so long destroyed that even the knowledge of its site has passed away. That in which he lived for 6 years, 1649 to 1655, after his first marriage, and where his children were born, is still standing in the village street, but modern reparations have robbed it of all interest. Bunyan's parents, though poor, were evidently worthy people, of good repute among their village neighbors. Bunyan seems to be describing his own father and his wandering life when he speaks of an honest, poor laboring man who, like Adam unparadised, had all the world to get his bread in, and was very careful to maintain his family. He and his wife were also careful that their children should be properly educated. Notwithstanding the meanness and inconsiderableness of my parents, writes Bunyan, it pleased God to put into their hearts to put me to school, to learn both to read and to write. There is reason to believe that what little education he had was gained in the grammar school of Bedford, and thither we may picture the little lad trudging, day by day, along the 1.5 miles of footpath and road from his father's cottage by the brookside, often, no doubt, wet and miry enough, not, as he says, to go to school to Aristotle or Plato, but to be taught according to the rate of other poor men's children. Whatever Bunyan may have learned at school, he confesses with shame that he soon lost it almost utterly. He was before long recalled from school to aid his father at the forge, and soon, with little to elevate or refine his character, he contracted many bad habits, especially those of cursing, swearing, lying, and blaspheming the holy name of God. Sins of this kind he declares to have become a second nature to him, and he says of himself that he became a notorious sin-breeder, the very ringleader of the village lads, in all manner of vice and ungodliness. We must beware, however, of drawing the conclusion, from Bunyan's unsparing self-condemnation, that he ever, either as a boy or man, lived a vicious life. All of Bunyan's biographers agree that his wickedness has been greatly overrated. His youthful escapades of orchard robbing or poaching might have brought him under the stroke of the laws, and put him to open shame before the face of the world. But he confesses no crime of a profligate habit. We have no reason to suppose that he was ever drunk, and we have his own most solemn declaration that he was never guilty of an act of unchastity. The passionate language in which he expresses his own self-abhorrence is the language of a highly strung spiritual nature, realizing its own offenses, venial as they appear to others, as sins against infinite love, and in the light of the sacrifice of Calvary, recognizing the heinousness of his guilt. The sinfulness of sin, more especially of his own sin, is the intensest of all possible realities to such a nature. No language is too strong to describe it. We may not unreasonably ask whether this estimate, however exaggerated it may appear to those who are strangers to the spiritual experiences, is altogether a mistaken one. The spiritual instinct was very early awakened in Bunyan. While still a child, but 9 or 10 years old, he tells us he was racked with convictions of sin and tormented with religious fears. He was haunted in his sleep with apprehensions of devils and wicked spirits coming to carry him away. The thought of the day of judgment hung over him like a dark cloud and made him tremble even in the midst of his boyish spirits. But these visions were but transient, and his ardent nature reacting from them, he gave himself with so much the less restraint to his boyish pleasures. Thoughts of religion became very grievous to him, and he put them out of his mind. Yet even in his most reckless days, the sense of religion was not dead in him, and he experienced a horror at seeing religion dishonored by those who professed it. Once, he says, when I was at the height of my vanity, hearing one to swear, who was reckoned for a religious man, it had so great a stroke upon my spirit that it made my heart to ache. This undercurrent of religious feeling was deepened by providential escapes from accidents which threatened his life, judgments mixed with mercy, he terms them, which made him feel that he was not utterly forsaken by God. Twice he narrowly escaped drowning, once in Bedford River, the Ouse, once in a creek of the sea, perhaps when on his tinkering rounds. The most impressive of these providential escapes is best told in his own words. When I was a soldier, I, with others, was drawn out to go to such a place to besiege it. But when I was just ready to go, one of the company desired to go in my room, to which, when I consented, he took my place, and coming to the siege, as he stood sentinel, he was shot in the head with a musket ball and died. When it was that Bunyan served in the army, and on which side he served, we have no means of knowing definitely. The religious import of the occurrences he relates constituted their only value in his eyes, and he gives us no further details than suffice to bring out this import. Probably it was shortly after the death of his mother, when he was 16, that he entered the army, and there are good reasons for thinking that he served on the side of Parliament, though Mr. Froude holds that probability is on the side of his having been with the Royalists. The place of the siege he refers to is equally undeterminable. Tradition says that Bunyan was present at the siege of Leicester, but the one thing certain is, that wherever the siege may have been, Bunyan was not at it. He tells us plainly that he was drawn to go, and gave up his place to a comrade who went in his room. In any case, Bunyan's military career was very short. He had only been a soldier a few months when the Battle of Naseby was fought, June 14, 1645. In 1646, the armies on both sides were disbanded, and Bunyan returned to Elstow and resumed his tinker's work at the paternal forge. End of section 1.